All right, everyone, welcome to meeting 56 of the Ethereum core developer meetings. Most of us are awake, I think. Um, we'll start with the first item, which is some roadmap items. Constantinople activated successfully yesterday, so yay. Um, it was fun.
Yay! Can we all take like 10 seconds to like celebrate?
Yay. Yay. Yay.
Yep, it was fun in the all core devs chat. We had some popcorn emojis and
No shots, unfortunately,
no
but definitely
shots.
popcorn.
Yeah, we were all very professionally sober. Well, that I know of. Actually, if someone did, I was unaware. Um, so that's great. I don't think we are having any problems with it yet, so that's good. Um, Next item, ProgPow audit. Gonna give a quick update on that. Um, Let me just pull up my update real quick. So we're going to publish the cat herders are going to publish a more official like blog post that gives more details on it. But I wanted to clear up some things about the ProgPow audit from the perspective of the Ethereum cat herders who were designated to try to organize one and also get signals from the community on what um, was going on with the audit. So, first of all, there's two components to the audit. The first one is the benchmarking, which is the less important one in my opinion because the community has been benchmarking lately. But that one looks to see by running graphics cards if NVIDIA versus AMD, if either one of them is more performant than the other in an unfair way. Whiteblock has a bounty out right now on both Bounty's network and Gitcoin to perform that work. That's to try to raise funding to do benchmarking on ProgPow. The other component of the audit is to see how long it would take an ASIC company to actually um, build a ProgPow ASIC and how performant it would be compared to a GPU by a factor of like 1x or 2x or 10x. So we can see if it's even going to be worth it to implement or if someone is just going to make another ASIC in 3 months and all our work will be for nothing since the work isn't entirely done yet. Um, and so that I feel like would be a more major factor in contributing whether or not to go forward with ProgPow. As far as signals from the community, we have a what I'm calling a hash vote, but I think there's a better name for it. If someone has a better name for it, let me know. And that's where miners are signaling on the Ethereum network using the extra data field, whether or not they support ProgPow. And so far, all the miners who have participated support it. There's a page on EtherChain that shows that. I can try to dig up the URL later. There's also a um, there's also a uh, coin vote that is also overwhelmingly yes. However, I want to stress these signals, and also a third thing I guess would be an official Twitter poll that the cat herders ran. All of those things are just signals. They're not anything that's going to be like a deciding factor. Oh, Lane posted the link. Thanks, Lane. Um, None of those are going to be a like truly deciding factor. It's more just figuring out like from which types of folks, which stakeholders think of certain things. So we know that the current miners on the network overwhelmingly support ProgPow, which was kind of already known to the for the most part, but this kind of cements it. Um, and so we have a an interested party who is going to send me a proposal for the second part of the audit, the one where it looks at how long it would take to actually build an ASIC. Um, and it looks like, oh, cool, there's some stats. 55% voter turnout for minor signaling, which is really high, and 100% in favor. I was surprised by that. That over half of the miners in the ecosystem voted. Really, I guess that's more than half of the hash power.
Yeah,
So,
I don't know how it's calculated. I don't know if that's per like number of blocks or if it's. I guess it equates to the same thing. If you take a large enough sample, then its hash power is the same as number of blocks. So yeah, that sounds accurate. I think it's 55% of hash power.
yep, that makes sense. So yeah, that other company, they're gonna get back to me hopefully by early next week, and then we would start either getting a Gitcoin grant together, start looking for funding like we did for White Block, and see what that's all about. So that's the update. Charles, Pooja, Joseph, is there anything I missed?
Hudson, could you?
Hudson,
Sorry,
sorry, go.
go ahead, Alexei. You go first.
So I just wanted to say that I've seen it somewhere. So there is another interpretation, which was potentially can be useful of this 55% number, which is the turnout for the minor signaling. Somebody said it, but I think I forgot where. Essentially, if those 55% that turned out and they all voted in favor, that gives you essentially a lower bound on how many GPUs are currently mining in the network. If you think it makes sense.
Yeah, actually, that is an interesting thing to think about.
Potentially, right? Unless there's some sort of like misdirected effort where someone's trying to split the network or something. But I agree. Generally, it seems like a lower bound.
Also, most of the votes we know which pools they came from. If you look at that Ether chain link I posted, it's Nano Pool, it's Ethermine, it's the folks you'd expect. F2 Pool. There's a few here that are unidentified. So yeah,
Yeah, and then Sparkpool was going to vote yes, is what I heard. I don't know if they ever got around to doing their extra data, but that would also represent an even bigger amount of hash power if they're not already represented.
they are not voting yet.
Oh, all right. Well, that makes a big difference too then.
Yeah, it might be worth asking them why, or maybe not. But yeah.
The last I heard, they were just trying to figure out how to do it at scale for their setup or something like that.
Hudson, I was going to ask if you wouldn't mind talking a tiny bit more about the funding question. I know there's been some question about this. Like, I know there was at least one application. I believe Andrea submitted to EF, and I'm a little unclear on this myself. Like, what was submitted is the official statement on the part of the foundation that they won't be financing any part of this, and if so, like, what's the plan? Anything you could say about funding would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very important that Andrea get his funding for ProgPow if we decide to go forward with it, or in my opinion, even if we don't, just because it's starting to trend in a way where we would go forward with it. I think it's important that he continue to work because he's been working without pay on ProgPow, and I don't think that's sustainable. In fact, I think he stopped working because it was not sustainable. As far as funding sources from the Ethereum Foundation, I was not involved in those conversations, and I don't know about any kind of official viewpoint or anything like that. I heard that there was a grant application submitted that got rejected. Um, I don't know if
Yeah,
people
I
know
can
more
say
about
more about
that.
that.
Oh, great,
Yeah,
Paul.
there was EF grant application that I actually suggested to do and participate in the process as an applicant, but I didn't uh, apply for any funding for myself. Yeah, but that was rejected following the standard dev grant process.
Okay, so it sounds like we have an answer there from the Ethereum Foundation perspective for the grant. Um, and I mean,
I guess I was just wondering if there's any color there on whether that was more of a political decision or a technical decision. Like if it's a technical decision, fine, that happens all the time. That's the grants process. But, if it were the case, hypothetically, again, I don't have any inside information either, but like EF is saying, we don't want to fund this, we don't want to fund things like this because we don't want to take a stance. I think that would be helpful for the community to know. So I don't know, maybe Hudson, Pavel,
Sorry, what was the grant?
Pavel, could you explain what the grant was?
Yeah, the grant was for two developers to work on ProgPow implementation in if miner and also to work on Stratum protocol a new version of it that will help with switching to to make a proof of work switch, and there was some, I think, two more tiny items that were also included related to mining infrastructure in general.
I wouldn't read it as political. I wasn't involved with this, but I know the past 3-4 months have been kind of like going back to the drawing board and making sure that they have the priorities straight and really trying to ensure that they're giving grants to things that are providing distinct value if they did not. And I think maybe my interpretation would be maybe there's a lot of prog pow work going on, and maybe the assumption is that it would be going on with or without the grant.
Well, the official statement is just like there was number of applications for grants, and just they selected some number of them based on.
Yeah,
so I think we cannot expect any other statement other than that. So that was presented to us, and I think that was accepted by the team.
I was going to just make a comment about the grant. First of all, I do know of other grants that have been rejected, so I wouldn't like read it as this is the only thing that has been rejected, because I know of other applicants that have applied and got rejected. So I don't think it's political at all. And the second thing I wanted to point out is that if you think about what the Ethereum Foundation should actually be funding, and I think it should be funding the things that otherwise cannot be commercialized or made used in a profitable way. So it's essentially public goods. So if you think about it, you might kind of conclude that some of this work could actually be profitable for some people. So therefore, they might try to find funding elsewhere. But this is my personal opinion.
Thanks, Alexei. That's helpful. Yeah, I agree. Let's not read too much into the EF grant. I guess then the question on my mind is just, what are the other options on the table? I know that there's at least two funding kind of requests open. I think they're both on Gitcoin, right? One is for Andrea's work, and the other one I believe is for Whiteblock.
That's correct.
Yeah, so just making people aware of those would be good, I think.
And the other thing is, I know that Consensus has a 500K, 500K, I guess, grant thingy they're doing. I don't know much about it though.
This is the last thing I'll say on this topic, and then we should move on. It's not like officially up to the core devs to like, worry about funding or get people money, but like, I do think that we need to have an honest conversation about it in this context as well as in a broader context. So yeah, I'm just curious if anyone else has any other thoughts. Like, I think that some of this work is probably pretty essential to the ecosystem, and it's pretty important that, without picking sides or having favorites, right, that in general that there be funds available for this sort of work.
And I would say the last thing as well is my thought about, I did read the magician thread about the audit and about the funding. So it was a calls for the Ethereum Foundation to fund it. But there are other ways to think about it, is that if you look at the carbon vote, I did actually look through the carbon vote with the people voting with the Ether, and you could see that the number of Ether which voted for Rook Power was about 3 million Ether. And I looked at where it came from. So it basically very large amounts, like up to 500,000, 200,000 Ether. So essentially there was about 20 different votes, which probably came up from about 3 entities. And so surely this basically reflects that these huge entities actually have interest in this project. So maybe we should ask them to fund this.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. But I don't know if we should be the ones asking, but individually, maybe not as a collective, but yeah, individually, I completely agree. Anybody else have comment on this before we move on?
The best thing they can do is just speed up their process, honestly. I mean, I've had a grant almost 2 months there, and they can't just let us know yes or no so we can move on knowing we have funding or not. Um, Not everybody can hang out for months waiting whether to know to go get a job rather than help Ethereum.
Okay, good feedback.
I have one more comment about the ProcPow audit. So I think I tried to make a note in some of the text discussions, but uh, well, to clarify, ProcPower never claimed it's ASIC resistant, and like there's no way to make an ASIC. But what ProcPower claims to provide is that the difference in performance between GPUs and ASICs, to simplify, will be much less than if hash. So I don't think it's really important, and that should be part of the audit to figure out how much time will it take to make an ASIC for ProcPower, uh, because it's somehow it's not really relevant. The question should be like if it's really true that the maximum difference will be 20% in favor of ASICs.
Yeah,
Christie amended that and said that it could be up to 50% if they use high bandwidth memory, which is very expensive. But I agree, the real audit is to verify that those bounds have solid reasoning.
Well, I remember late, like some time ago, when we had this really serious discussions on a Gitter channel. I've been asking the question, what is the success criteria for the proc POW? And I've never got the answer. And actually, what Pavel was saying is probably would potentially be the answer, because whenever you try to pin it down, there's always things like, oh, but the GPUs are also ASICs, or but they probably can be created, but in 3 years, and this kind of thing. So unless we pin down what is the success criteria, then the audit's probably not going to deliver much kind of satisfaction.
that's interesting. Um,
Anybody who knows the answer has damn good business reasons to keep their mouths shut and make the ASICs.
yeah, that's actually why a few different ASIC manufacturers have declined to do the audit in the first place.
Why would you? It's competition.
Luckily, the person that is offering to do that, that's going to be sending me a proposal, is um, independent of ASIC manufacturers and seems pretty excited to potentially do this and has the background, as far as I can tell, to complete something like this and the team behind it.
I'm still confused why we're doing this. What part of our consensus wasn't clear that we're revisiting these issues?
That's a good question.
It's my only question.
I'm trying to remember the meeting where we decided to do the audit and what we came to.
We were looking only for technical problems like holes in the algorithm, um, not not whether the algorithm was going to have a certain percentage of effect. I think we knew we were in an arms race with the ASICs, and at some point we'll either decide to maintain the race or decide the ASICs win. But for the next 9 months, we decided we're going to do this unless there's a technical problem with the algorithm, not whether somebody thinks that maybe the ASICs can win the battle over some period of time.
The argument about the ASICs and the margin of efficiency is one of the claims in the EIP. So I think that's within bounds of a technical problem because they claimed it in the EIP.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other people have comments on that? Yeah, good
Well,
question.
I
Oh, go
also
ahead.
would say the comment that I also read recently is that, so the question I also been asking in like whether we would like to kind of keep fighting ASICs, or we just do one attempt and then we stop at this, because I heard sort of somewhere renew sort of go, okay, because we have the knobs, so the proc file has a lot of knobs, like 6 different parameters that we can change. But then my question is that, are we actually going to do this? Are we going to keep tuning it to basically do hard fork every 6 months? And because this is not defined, the conversation, they just go all over the place whenever we start discussing this, because it has never been decided, like how, what we're going to do after that. And my concern mostly comes from the appreciation that the bandwidth of the change in Ethereum protocol is actually limited. So like something can dominate this whole agenda for months, for agenda of this meeting. And so that makes it really hard to actually do the other improvements that we really need as well.
That's when you form a working group and tell them to go away and come back with information.
I completely agree with that, Greg, and that's why I think the working group should take over, and then we remove it from the agenda and we don't talk about every single time.
We don't have to decide for this hard fork what we're going to do for the next 5.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, the people, so when you say working group, that's kind of what the cat herders are doing. So we don't have to have it on future agendas until we have the audit done. It was more community requested that we have it on the agenda. So I decided to put it on there because it's something that people want to hear about that is on a technical level it's in some ways. So that's the reason it's on the agenda, but I agree it shouldn't be on the agenda every time because we'll just rehash the same arguments. And it's pretty clear what we're doing. Even if it's not clear why all the time, it's clear what we're doing. Yeah, because I agree, Greg. Your question was really good. Um, okay, so we can. Anyone else have any ProgPow comments? Cool. So the next item is the Istanbul Hard Fork Roadmap, and I forgot to add something else in there: the Hard Fork Coordinator role. Um, so Offrey's no longer the Hard Fork Coordinator. And a very good question came up actually, how he became hard fork coordinator. And it was discovered that I thought that I talked about it in a meeting, but I hadn't. And so technically, I just like decided he was hard fork coordinator along with the rest of the cat herders. Like we all just were like, "Oh, Afri wants to do it. That's great." But but then we didn't really talk about it in here. So we should probably talk about that now. Does anyone want to, or what do we think about having a hard fork release coordinator? It seems like from previous discussions everybody wants it, but is there anyone who's against it?
Does anybody want to do it?
There's some
Well,
people who've come forward.
yeah, before we get to that, Greg, I agree with Hudson's question. It would be helpful to talk about what the role is and whether we all think it's worth having. I'll just share one quick thought. Like, I think there's value in this, and the reason is because the number of teams and the number of individuals working on even just the Ethereum 1 work stream, not even to mention the ETH2 stuff, but of course that as well, has grown quite a bit, right? The size of these calls have grown, the complexity, the coordination work required in getting everyone on the same page and getting these hard forks to happen has grown as well. I do think and hope that I am expressing, the consensus of this group when I say that like we'd like to do hard forks more often, or upgrades, I should say, more often. And I do think that the coordinator role can help a lot with that. So I see value in it. But I'm curious as well if anyone disagrees.
So my question to the sort of hard fork coordinator role is whether this person or a group of people going to be only concerned with the actual hard fork, meaning like something which sort of starts, let's say, 1 month before the block of the hard fork, and then ends at on the day of the hard fork, or is it more like loosely defined, spills over to APIPs and all sorts of stuff? So where does the barrier between kind of EIP coordinator and hard fork coordinator stands? But I do agree with Lane that if we do want to sort of reflect on like why we are doing things the way we're doing, and maybe we should do better, and maybe we should do more hard forks fast, sort of more frequently, then yes, I think that might be important role.
Yeah, and just to answer your question, they would not be an EIP editor. They would obviously have to read EIPs and coordinate some of the core EIPs that are going into like the meta EIP for upcoming hard forks. But in general, a hard fork coordinator, in my mind, would be someone who, between now and the next hard fork, decides hard dates for deadlines of submitting EIPs for consideration, deciding on those EIPs, implementation and testing, and then finally what day the hard fork would be. Of course, they wouldn't be a dictator in this regard, but they would be the one to come up with suggestions or different options to bring to the table, because no one really has time to do that so far. Also, if there's any kind of disorganization with it, like confusion over EIPs or like confusion over um, what people want, they can kind of sift through like core dev meetings and online discussions and kind of filter through that stuff. So that's my idea, but it could definitely expand to other things depending on what the release coordinator feels like they need to do. So, in general, a few people have come to me and said they want to help. So I'm going to collect a group of those people and maybe do. A lot of people actually suggested that we do a community vote on who should do it. I don't know if that's the best route or not. I wanted to hear opinions on that. If it should be the core devs deciding who the core dev release manager is or the community deciding who the release manager is.
Is it also possible that we might split the role among, 2 to 3 people as well?
Yeah, that's absolutely possible.
Who actually wants to do it?
Joseph's come forward and said he would do it.
Good. I volunteer him.
Yeah, there's some other people I want to definitely give a chance to say their part since they've come forward, but I haven't had a chance to talk with them deeply. I haven't even had a chance to talk with Joseph deeply about it, but he's come forward.
It's more
I,
like, it's
Hudson,
more
I
do
like,
think,
we?
it's
I'm
more
sorry.
like, is there any objection to this person? It's not, it's not like we have so many people who just want to go through that abuse.
Oh yeah, no, there's not. It's more like people understanding like if there's going to be more than one person, and it really, I mean, if the core devs don't really care, then they can delegate it to the cat herders, and the cat herders can pick some people, or to either split the role or to have one single person do it.
If the cat herders volunteer as a group, go for it.
That was going to be my question. Do we see this as something that falls under the purview of the cat herders?
You just
I mean,
volunteer.
it's still not clear. I mean, I'm sure it will be clear as it goes on that what is the actual um, so what are the decisions that these people are going to make? Because what we do want them to do is essentially to aggregate some information and make decisions, or we don't want to make them to make any decisions, or they're just going to be information aggregators. Um, what is it?
We have a blog out that we released. Did we release that yesterday, everyone who's a cat herder in this room? When did we release that blog that explained what the cat herders are?
2 days ago, I think, or maybe yesterday morning.
Yeah, that sounds right. Pooja, do you know? I think you might be on mute. Oh, thank you. If you could post that link, that'd be great. That should answer your question, Alexi, about the scope of the cat herders.
No,
Um,
no, this is not. This is about release manager. If
oh,
we already decided that it's going to be the same thing, or uh,
yeah, that's a good question. I think people don't really care; they just want one. Is kind of what I'm hearing because I'm not hearing a lot of comments on it. So we can do this. Let's have the cat herders figure out who wants to and get them all in the same chat room and see if they want to split the role. I think that sounds good to me. Anybody else have any ideas? Okay, the cat herders can do that then. Alexi, you didn't get your question answered though? Could you re-explain it?
No, that's okay. I think it's too. I don't expect all these questions to be answered straight away because it requires a bit of figuring out.
Sure.
I yeah. So I just wanted to, for example, more concrete question is you probably saw it in the yeah, in the GitHub issue that I was proposing a couple of things, a couple of changes into the actual process, and I wonder whether this is going to be purview of the core release manager. For example, I'm suggesting to appoint dedicated reviewers for the change rather than to wait for somebody to look at the changes. Because as far as I can remember, like a lot of times, especially if the hard fork is not very near, it takes quite a long time for somebody actually to pick up the change and look at it, and that because there's no dedicated reviewers. And I think that's a shame because we waste a lot of time waiting for things to happen, and that we have a very really small limited number of people who are expected to look at the changes. So I would rather have to get some appointed potentially people who are not even on the calls, but they want to review the changes. They just can review them and come on the call to explain what they found, and so we can iterate quicker over all these things rather than having things aligned down.
Hopefully we can find that role, and if we can't, then we can have the release manager poke at people who would review that, such as the EIP authors, to do more review.
Well, I don't mean to have a permanent role of reviewer. I mean that it's like for each change, we basically somehow pick the reviewers who probably want to do the review, and those reviewers are not necessarily like the core devs who are kind of initiated, I would say, in this call, but somebody else who actually really wants to do it. Um, and then the second thing I wanted to propose is something I already said before, is that we need to revisit the assumption that we have to kind of bundle lots of updates into one big release. I heard before that it's really hard to coordinate the release, but actually I'm keep questioning this. Is it really? And so I hope that they put this new role of release manager or group of people help us to really understand if it's really difficult or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are good ideas, and I'm sure the release manager will take them into account.
So one of the things I'd like to point out is before Afri left, he did set up a schedule that you're going to have this done by that. We're expecting this to be done by this point, this to be done by that point. I think some of those roadmap dates are going to help us, get to the point where we get these things reviewed, get these things in at a time, and make a decision to put it in or pull it out. So I think there's some changes already coming that are going to help address some of these issues if we actually follow the dates and if the roadmap is still valid. But as far as my opinion on multiple smaller releases, it's going to make things take even longer because there's a lot of lead up and preparation that goes towards getting each of these releases out that I've seen. That if we do it multiple times with smaller things, it's going to be a lot more inefficient. They're going to come still about every 6 to 9 months with smaller releases. So I think it's more efficient to bundle multiple in. But that's something for the release manager discussion.
I think thank you for this comment, but I think this is this is based on the assumption that we continue doing things as we did before, and this is why I put another two or one or a comment on my. So what I also propose is we first of all we introduce high standards on the IPs, that we need to require some kind of proof of concept and probably pre-generated test cases, so we don't leave it till the later. And also my proposal about the appointing reviewers might help as well. So because I think a lot of people assume that we have to sit on a change for months before it actually gets in, but as we did a bit of retrospective on this during the workshop, that we don't actually have to sit on this for a month. If we find the reviewers quickly, iterate, implementation doesn't actually take that long. The generating test cases probably takes that long because there's only one person or two people doing it. But if we make it a burden onto the EIP author to actually do that, to help the testing team, that I think we can move much quicker than before.
I agree. EIP should come with test vectors.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, I want to move on from this item because I think we've figured out what we're going to do. Um, so let's go ahead and go to subroutines and static jumps for the EVM. There's a link to the Magician's thread and to the EIP. This is something Greg just wanted to bring up because I believe it's going to last call soon. So, Greg, you can take it away.
Yeah, I didn't want to discuss it in any detail. I just wanted a heads up that it's coming because there's people on this call who I'd love to have some review, and they might not hear about it otherwise.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And let's see, the next item, reject EIP 1355. That's Paul's item. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah, mostly I think most of people that were involved in it, and so it was originally proposed as a kind of counter argument for ProcPow, but in the end we realized it's not very effective. And considering how much time does it take to discuss all proof of work changes and related issues with that, I don't think it's really possible to have it done any time. So yeah, to clear it up, I would like to mark that as rejected.
So I think according to the EIP process, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, you can withdraw an EIP if you're the author of it, and it basically has roughly the same meaning as rejected. Because rejected would be the core developers deciding it's rejected, like because of a technical issue, more so. But you can change the status to withdrawn, and then it's withdrawn.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that. So yeah, I think that's maybe better approach to it.
Okay, sounds good. Um, Next up, working group updates. Um, I think the main people who are here for that, there's EWASM's here, and state fees are here, I believe. And then um, maybe if Peter has any update on the state pruning. I don't know if there'd be an update on that, but let's start with state fees. That would be Alexei, who just released part 6 of his really cool in depth articles on reflections from the Stanford Working Group. So, Alexei, if you want to give an update on that, and then I had some comments.
Okay, so I'm just going to post the link again to the blog post that Hudson just referenced is it's the 6th part has linked to all the first parts as well. So I wrote it after the event, and I added more data analysis and more thoughts on this. And so I reflected on this Ethereum workshop, and I've realized that there were some blind spots, so which I will talk in a bit later. But essentially, the main thing that I carried out, or we carried out of the workshop, is that there were 4 main problems that are performance problems that are coming from the large state and a growing state. And the first problem is the failure of the snapshot sync. Second problem is the duration of the snapshot sync. The third problem is the slowing down of the block ceiling, and the fourth problem is the slowing down transaction processing due to the state size. And so the blog describes in detail like what are these problems and how we're planning to, but some of them how we're planning to address them. And for example, the first problem, which I deem the most critical one, can actually be solved by introducing a better sync protocol. And I know that already some work going on about it in the Parity and Go Ethereum. They have different names for this. Also, Andrew is now working with me on Ethereum 1x. He's also working on the modeling and documenting the sort of our version of this protocol. He came up with a cool name for it. It's called the Red Queen, which is not to be confused. It's a Lewis Carroll reference. It's not to be confused with the Queen of Hearts. Actually, they're 2 different things. But the Red Queen is the one which basically says that in order to even stay on the same place, you have to keep running. And this is where, so the idea is that you have to keep following so when you sync, you actually try to chase the head of the chain while you're syncing. but this hopefully, these all efforts hopefully converge once we start having some specification. And I don't think we need the hard fork for that, but we will need to get some coordination in terms of the peer-to-peer protocol. Then the blind spot that I talked about is that I want to come back to the idea of stateless clients, and this is not the same as the stateless contract that I was describing in the state fees proposal. The stateless clients is actually the idea that the blocks that we are propagating through the network, they are uh, basically augmented by some more information, which provides you the sort of the state subtree, like with all the hashes that essentially provide the proof that the data that these transactions are reading are indeed belong to the state, and then the updates the transactions are performing result in the new state root. So essentially, by having simply the blocks and the state roots of those augmented data, which is like we call them block proofs, then we will be able to execute the transactions without even having access to the state. And this has previously been researched a little bit, but not so much. So I also wanted, like 1 year ago, to do some data analysis on how big these block proofs would be. I know that Vitalik has done some analysis, and Casey also did that. But this time I wanted to do kind of more seriously, meaning that I almost am doing the proof of concept for this, so to make sure that my estimates are correct. And so I will publish the details about how big these things are, and we will see if this is something which we could combine with the state fees. The reason for that is because so after the workshop and after been writing all this these blog posts, I realized I did some project planning, and I realized the most expensive and the most laborious part of this project would be what I call the ecosystem research, which is basically analyzing like all possible contracts that exist currently, the very popular ones, and figuring out how they can change and how it can adapt to the state fees, and that potentially could take months and cost a lot of money. So I'm trying to see if it's truly necessary. So I'm mildly kind of I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. I'm say possibly ballistic on this sort of regard. So I would not say much more because I don't want to hog all the time in the meeting. But yes, any comments on that?
I would say that use it, and we talked about this privately, but the idea of using like stateless clients for contract storage definitely has a lot of advantages to it, especially since it would have. As I made that ETH research post where I compared the two, but it seems like it would break less existing stuff, which is a nice benefit. And like doing it just at contract level and not at kind of the level of the whole system would definitely kind of remove a lot of the biggest risks that I see. I guess the main challenge in all of this is definitely going to be like basically whether or not the data, whether or not the costs of like having potentially much higher bandwidth are worth it. And as part of that, I guess a couple of questions. One of them is how would we actually do gas costs for the bandwidth? So like would we still have a fixed gas cost for accessing a storage slot? Would we try to do gas costs based on the length of the Merkle branches to try to incentivize having smaller trees and incentivize reusing access? Would we try to do something else? And otherwise, like if it becomes too big, what actually is the cost of data? Like do we, I know we decided at the workshop that call data is like probably very kind of overpriced by now, but like what would the new implicit price would be? Is that a number that we're okay with?
Okay, thank you for that. So to answer the question about the cost, so yes, definitely these proofs that are according to the current idea that these extra proofs, they will have to be paid for. by the transaction sender, and in this case, the payment would go to the miner rather than being burned, because essentially introduction of this system relieves everybody, all the nodes apart from the miner, from actually having a state. So everybody else that doesn't even need to have a let's say that the cached try in the memory, because they can simply verify the proofs and update their database. Even if they have the entire state in the database, they don't actually have to cache it in the memory. So that means that we get, like, everybody apart from the miners will get a huge boost in terms of performance, in terms of the resource consumption. So and I would charge the not in terms of the length of the branches, but basically per byte of the proof. So currently, as I'm working on this sort of little proof of concept, I'm actually going to calculate the two parts of this proof, so the actual hashes that are accompanying the thing, and the data. So the data is essentially what have you read during a transaction. So we might charge for it differently. And also, if the proofs turned out to be super big, what we could also do, we could use something like Stark proofs or Snark proofs to actually compress them in such a way that there will be a fixed size per block for all the proofs, but you will not be able to compress the data this way. So I'm want to explore this maybe within the next week or two, and publish some data so we could have a discussion about it. It's not sort of decided yet that this is the pivot we're going to take, but it is potential pivot.
Okay, no, that makes it definitely makes a lot of sense to try to kind of look at both of those paths in parallel and see like how viable both of them ends up being. I guess just quick kind of zooming out more broadly, has there been progress on like figuring out what the costs of like bandwidth data are? Because I guess like proof data of this kind like seems like it would have the exact same costs as like transaction data. So do we have good like better ideas on how much that theoretically should be charged for?
No, I'm not I'm not aware of such analysis, but it's definitely important. So I don't have it in my plan yet. So, but very good point. Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess like final point is that this sort of stuff could be made 4 times more efficient if we replace the hexary tree with like basically like any kind of binary tree. So is like tree so like should tree replacement like be part of this, and like if so for very big contracts, like has there been thought of how to do that kind of instantaneously?
I have thought about it, but not for a very long time. So as far as I can tell now, it's very challenging to try to swap the hexary tree, binary tree. That's why I hope that if we get something, if we have some sort of Stark or Snark proofs, we might obviate this altogether. But yeah, so I haven't figured out how to do it.
Yeah, but like instinctively, Stark proofs don't seem like the sort of thing that would be viable within the next like even one and a half years, or at least
I'm a bit more optimistic on that.
Okay, that would be good. No, I guess like my main concern, aside from like all of these technical issues, is that there's like zero knowledge proving things in general. Like at least general purpose has an overhead of a factor of like anywhere between like 100 and 100,000, depending on how ugly the computation is. And hash functions that we use today tend to be on the very ugly side. And given what I know about the efficiency of rollup, which seems to be a very similar case to this, like it doesn't seem optimistic, and it seems like that would like basically require block producers to have like a whole other layer, a whole other GPU dedicated to proof generation, which like maybe okay.
I will start exploring this with so I will start exploring this topic with the guys from Starkware once I've got the data sizes. So maybe they will give me some hints about whether it's viable or not.
Okay, and I imagine the just as a kind of by the way, the NF 2.0 team will probably be having those same conversations with both Stark World, probably various people.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Alexei, thanks for the update. A lot of the kind of stuff you just shared, I don't recall seeing that in the latest kind of Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians post thread and the latest thing you posted on kind of storage management state fees. Just wondering if there's like a more recent thread, or I have a lot of questions and ideas as well, but rather than take up a lot of time on this call, I was thinking that'd be a good forum. So where should we have that conversation?
Yeah, so I haven't. So I only started working on this like 3 days ago. So I haven't had the time to publish anything yet. But I will hopefully publish something within like next few days. And so because I really want to have finish this coding first, and then I will just write something up. I brought that up in this call because it's important to know about the potential upcoming pivot, but I simply didn't have time to put it down and writing yet. Sorry, yeah.
Cool.
But
Okay. I'll keep my eyes. Yeah, I'll keep my eyes peeled for that and look forward to digging into it. Thank you.
So you mentioned the parity geth, hybrid, warp, whatever, sync. Is there any place where those prototypes are available that we could play with and try and implement in Pantheon, for example?
So this is the challenge at the moment, and I think if somebody from Parity and Go Ethereum are in a call, they could correct me. But at the moment, there are some prototypes in the code, but it's not like written down as a spec or a model. So that's why so one of the things we're going to do with this Red Queen, we will actually try to do the spec as well as a modeling. So yeah, at the moment it's a bit too early to say, and I would like to also have to encourage other people to write up the specs as well, but it's a bit early stages. Yes.
I'm happy with
definitely
the code that they've committed if they could just share that.
Okay, yes.
So at least the Go code is, there's a pull request. I'm not sure whether there's a pull request or just my branch, but I can share the link. The code itself, I mean, it's fairly simple. I guess it's more or less the idea. You get the idea. But there are still a few corner cases that I haven't solved completely. And honestly, I haven't, I wrote that code a year ago and I haven't touched it since because something always came up.
One other thing that you talked about, Alexi, was figuring out the P2P protocol. Are you talking about like if we're using like libp2p or something new, or which protocol?
No, I was talking about so we have this thing called ETH63, which currently is used to essentially shuffle the data around the Ethereum network. By the data, I mean the headers, blocks, transactions. So for each of these type of data, there is normally a pair of what I call operative. It's like get block header, get this, and then you also announce thing. So what I mean by changing peer-to-peer protocol is actually adding more operatives to that. For example, to get me like a range of leaves or something like that. So adding some operatives to that, which means that we will need to sort of upgrade the protocol so that the clients can all understand each other. And these operatives will be dedicated to supporting this new advanced protocol, which pretty much never fails, hopefully.
Got it. Okay. Anybody else have comments on Alexi's update? Okay. We can move on. There was an EWASM working group. I don't know if that's still a working group or not. Lane, do you have any updates or comment on that?
Yeah, I'm not. There's a little confusion here because I think the EWASM working group is sort of like the EWASM team, and unfortunately, like neither Casey nor Alex is on the call. I don't know, Pavel, do you have anything to say? I don't know if I have any update on that.
I don't have anything in particular except we preparing for EFCC.
Great. Okay.
Sorry, Hudson, if I may, I wanted to throw something in for the EWASM as well.
Sure.
So what I've been thinking about in terms of EWASM and after the workshop and then before that is also if some of you might remember in the first proposal of the state fees or state rent it was called, I was actually suggesting linear storage, which is like a new type of storage which doesn't exist yet in Ethereum. And one of the reasons why I really liked that was that EWASM is essentially kind of operates on a linear memory, and the idea was that you can do the memory mapping from the storage into the memory in a very straightforward way. I still think it's a good idea, and I'm currently like trying to research this as well, and maybe I will propose as part of the whole state management thing. Maybe I will propose this linear storage again, but in a different guise, maybe more integrated with the EWASM. So I just wanted to throw this in.
Just to be clear, linear storage, like, does that just mean storage is a byte array, or?
So the current idea that, for example, if we introduce a new type of contract, for example, that will have EWASM code instead of the EVM code or something like that, and instead of our storage, which is like a mapping, to have essentially an array of bytes or word, and then let's say do some sort of Merkle mounting ranges on top of that instead of the Merkle trees, which is friendly to the to expansion. So that basically means that whenever we execute EWASM, we just map the part of the storage into the memory, and then you can have this really great benefit, because then you can use all sorts of libraries from the, let's say, the red black trees, or sort of some sort of sorted structures, whatever have you. So because they would be all these libraries are written in the assumption that you have linear memory instead of like kind of the Ethereum storage. So I see it as a potential for code reuse.
Would you be expecting the storage size to be like something fixed in of one size, so like possibly capped by like 24K or some similar number, or is it also arbitrarily expandable?
I thought about this because I remember you were suggesting this idea somewhere. I still thinking about it. It might be a good idea, but at the moment I'm thinking about expandable storage. So, but I remember your.
So like you would still be able to like go into store like byte number 547 gazillion, right? It would
kind of, but it will cost you astronomically much, a lot of gas or whatever.
Oh, I see. So in that case, it is kind of de facto capped, right? At like basic whatever coordinate would.
Okay. Was that all the comments? Great.
Another quick thing on EWASM is especially like this is also kind of slightly veering into ETH2 territory, but I made a comment, I think either on GitHub yesterday or a day before, basically like asking what does the EWASM team kind of think should be the kind of interface of EWASM with respect to the rest of the system. So this would basically be like calls, foreign function interfaces, like how environment variables and storage would be accessed and things like that. So I guess I was wondering, like, are there? Like, it would be nice to hear, like, in case the team had any thoughts, like what would an ideal kind of wish list for an interface look like? Like, is it basically the same as what we have now, but simpler? Do we want to add any new kinds of features, something else?
So how it looks now, it's like we have versions from simple as EVM up to the new ideas how to do it, but definitely we need to take some kind of iteration over it with other teams to figure out what are the requirements on the other side. So I think it was a good idea to initially do this conversation. So there's a number of proposals, mostly in the design repo of EWASM, that has some proposals how to make it either more generic or more related to WebAssembly. And yeah, we have to proceed that in some way with probably other teams, as I said.
Pavel, I have a question for you. Do you think this would look anything like ECI, like the work that you've done on that, or would this be a very different type of interface?
So Yeah, that's one of the. Well, this a way. So I think there are two aspects, like how much compatibility we need with EVM and what lessons have we learned from EVM in general. What are good parts of it and like bad parts of it. So this is how you actually want to access data from Ethereum environment. Let's call it this way. And they will probably look as imported functions in WebAssembly. But the other aspect of it is how actually you want to interact between contracts, because both of them are written in the end in WebAssembly, and WebAssembly provides some more efficient or more direct ways of calling one model from the other. So this opens another set of possibilities. I'm trying to keep it on this high level, but that's most.
Yeah. So Alex also mentioned in this same thread, I just posted the link, that we're investigating different ways of doing contract linking as well. So I think that ties into what you were just talking about.
Okay, great. Then I'll probably like poke into the EWASM design repo at some point, and I guess I'll like wait for like EWASM people to come up with more things.
Yeah, I'll take a look as well at the design repo, Vitalik, and I'll try to map some of the open issues there to some of the questions and topics that you raised in this thread as well. We could take it from there.
Okay, and if you want to like poke through there and like give me whatever the kind of pointers to things that you think would be more valuable to read would be good too.
Great, we'll do.
Okay.
Cool. Let's see, was there anything else on that? I don't think so. Anyone from Pruning Sync or Simulation here? Okay. And I don't know if those would have much of an update anyway. For testing updates, which is the next item.
Oh,
go
I
ahead.
I think it said something about, is there appetite for future?
Oh, you're right. Yeah, we talked about that last time. Anyone have any comments on that? I kept it on because there weren't any comments last time, but there's a different group of people on this time. So are there any?
So
go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say that the in-person meetings are important, but I wouldn't do them like very often because there is a certain amount of work, you know. So you know, there's all this traveling fatigue people have, and some people feel that it's actually not very inclusive when people gather around in the. I must say that, for example, with the workshop that we did in Stanford, I was skeptical before I came, but afterwards it turned out to be a very, very useful thing to do. I know that I know a lot of people couldn't make it, but I say that it is definitely useful, but we shouldn't try to do them too often. I don't know, when we think that we have enough kind of divergence in our mental models, then we kind of come together. So far,
in terms of like making them more inclusive if they have to happen, like bouncing them between continents is also helpful. So I think like the last one was in San Francisco, and then there'll be a kind of some people descending on Australia, both of which are not very convenient for people from Europe. But then at least like in our 2.0 calls, we've been getting someone kind of constantly badgering us about having one in Barcelona. So like it might make sense to do something in Barcelona at some point, and then I'm sure lots of people that were just found it way too inconvenient to come to one could just would end up coming to that one.
I know a lot of ETH2 folks are planning to meet in Sydney around EdCon. I'm just wondering if any ETH1X folks are going to be there as well. Maybe we could take advantage of that if people will be there, or maybe not.
That sounds like a good idea as long as people will be there.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to kind of cajole people into taking 20-hour flights. If anyone is coming, then we'll be happy to chat. There's a meeting planned during EdCon already.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest help is just enough warning. International flights get more and more expensive as the date approaches. So often there's so little warning, it's just not possible.
When's EdCon?
April 8th to 14th.
Yeah, that's pretty
The
soon.
first, yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like there is an appetite for future meetings, but we may need to have them with enough lead time. So anyone who wants to take initiative on planning those meetings can go ahead and do it, even if it's more, I guess, ad hoc and not like a really, really big one. They can at least give the opportunity and then people can attend. And I know EdCon's pretty well attended, so that might be a good one for someone to take up the torch on. I can't because I won't be going, but someone else could.
Yeah,
I
I'll be
would
there.
say, but I would say that for specifically for the Ethereum 1x, I think it might be, from my point of view, it might be too early because we haven't. I mean, I haven't even digested the previous workshop yet. I mean, I've been digesting it for like a month and a half.
Yeah, yeah, and figuring out the specs a little more clearly. That's a good point.
It sounds like maybe Barcelona, maybe sometime in the summer, maybe it's too soon to pick a date. But yeah, just back of the mind. That's helpful.
All right, cool. Um, I think for we can get off that topic. For testing updates, I don't think Dimitri and Martin are here. Does anyone else have testing updates? Okay.
Well, yeah, there was small change to blockchain test recently, uh, which aligned the configuration for what actually happened on the mainnet yesterday, which is Constantinople and uh, the Constantinople fix were activated on the same block. So previously, the blockchain test uh, for this case what's was a bit different, and we changed that. So some set of tests are different now, and they were uploaded, I believe, yesterday. So uh, yeah, that's something client teams can take a look on.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Um, Next up, we have client updates. So we'll just run through that and then we'll be good to go. Geth,
Heyo. So update-wise, I think the two more interesting updates are that we managed finally to merge in all the changes that slimmed down the databases and cut out a lot of redundant data. So we're kind of down by about 16 gigs compared to our previous one, which kind of puts us in the same ballpark as parity. So I'm really happy about that one. And apart from that, we kind of recently also found some bug within LevelDB, which we fixed. And this seems to have sped up our archive syncs quite a bit, but we're still not quite happy, so we're still looking into it. But yeah, apparently we managed to shave off quite a bit from the sync times. And yeah, I guess that's mostly what the success story is. And apart from that, we're mostly working on networking-wise on Discovery Protocol and Light Client, and essentially trying to pull off the whole historical state pruning. But that seems to be a bit tough to debug. And that's about it.
okay. Anyone from Parity here? Okay. Aleth?
No real update except the information that we haven't done the stable release of Constantinople fix yet. We are a bit behind the schedule for that.
Okay. Trinity? Okay. Ethereum JS? Harmony?
Hello. Nothing special from Harmony for now, except we smoothly passed hard fork. So that's it.
All right, Pantheon.
Yes, so big news this week is we released Pantheon 1.0. The big improvement there is cutting our archive sync time down. We cut it about in half, which brings us to about half the speed of Geth on Robston. More to come in future releases, but that was a pretty big one for us. We'll be continuing to work on performance, reliability, and fast sync. And we also want to get involved with the work on the fast warp POCs. We actually haven't found any of the details on that yet. So if you are working on that and wouldn't mind reaching out to us or pointing us in the right direction, that would be much appreciated.
Congrats on the 1.0 milestone. That's exciting.
Yeah, congrats. Eric, did you have anything else, or was that it?
Nope, that's it. Thanks.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. TurboGeth?
Hi, it's me again. So I haven't yet. So TurboGeth is progressing, but not. I mean, I haven't rebased for the Constantinople upgrade, so it hasn't actually sync past Constantinople yet. But something that I have fixed recently while I was doing this stateless client thing is that I have this. The bold DB, I recently introduced the memory only mode where you don't actually have put anything on disk, and then it was surprisingly slow, but then I found why it was slow. So now I'm hoping that I will have an option to basically have the entire current state in memory, but not in the format of the trie, but in the format of the actual B tree, which is much more compact, and it takes let's say 10 gigabytes if you have that sort of memory. But that would result in ultra fast archive sync. So I haven't tested it yet, but I will do it afterwards. But yes, at the moment I'm mostly using TurboGeth as basically a working horse for all the data analysis, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, I haven't caught up with the other things yet.
Okay. Nimbus?
Yeah, I can give a quick update. So first of all, congratulations to all the big boys on the Constantinople release. On the Nimbus side, we're making slow progress, and we're almost there for the Homestead fork. So we've been able to sync like 1 million blocks now, running all of them and through the EVM and so on, which is pretty cool. So yeah, slow and steady progress.
Great. Mana or Ethereum? Okay. Mantis? I still need to get those devs in here, but I keep not getting in touch with the right people. Ethereum? Okay. I think we have someone from Web3J here. Do you got any cool updates about your project?
Hey, yeah, nothing really apart from we're implementing EIP 712 right now in Web3J.
Okay. And research, we'll have Danny go first and then Vitalik.
I think Vitalik left. We're focused highly on these ETH2O specs. The phase 0, which is the core kind of proof of stake system stuff, is relatively stable. A lot of people are moving towards simulations and test nets and things. Phase 1, which is consensus on data of the shard chains, the bones of which exist in a spec document. But we expect this to go through kind of a highly iterative design phase, similar to the phase 0 stuff. But if you're interested in checking out the proof of custody games and stuff and providing feedback, now is probably a good time to take a look. And then the phase 2, which is state execution on shard, cross-shard transactions. This is something that we want to see and is beginning to ramp up the efforts in parallel. There's Vitalik had an issue in the specs repo. I think actually Lane already posted that a while ago, where we're beginning to discuss. This is just kind of a large design space, and good time to start narrowing it down. That's generally what's going on the research side. Check out youth research if you want to see more of the stuff that's more outside of the spec realm, but more in just the research area. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all of the groups in the agenda. Does anyone else have any final thoughts or anything else? Agenda items that weren't on there?
I think there was a little bit of debate on the issue about specific EIPs that were proposed for Istanbul. So Alex put 3 of them forward, but then Alexei had also said, before we do that, why don't we talk about some of the higher level questions that he brought up earlier. So I just wanted to acknowledge that those EIPs were there. I don't know that we need to talk about them necessarily today.
Yeah, so there was a question number 4 in my comments about a deluge. Do we want to create a deluge of EIP and sort through them, or do we first kind of want to figure out if we want to do things in a different way this time? That's my main question.
Do you have an idea for an alternative way to do it?
Well, this comes back to my 2 suggestions. It's about the sort of processing EIPs quicker by appointing the reviewers, and essentially by potentially making the releases shorter, and therefore we don't really make kind of everybody is a hostage of everybody else. Like so that's my basically 2 suggestions, and I think generally we might also do a bit more reflection on the past and retrospective, whether like what you know, whether we did the best we could in the previous 2 releases.
Okay. We might discuss that more in the next meeting, but for the moment, everybody be thinking, maybe not putting down like on that meta EIP, but thinking about the different EIPs that you would want to go into Istanbul. And we can talk about those. Feel free to put them on the agenda that I'll be putting up pretty soon. And yeah, I think that's all good. Um, I think, is there anything else anybody had? Okay, cool. One quick thing, real quick, let me get the list here. Can Anton, Dano, and Alexi stay on after the call ends? I had a couple of things that were just outside of core dev stuff.
Okay.
Thanks. All right, bye everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks. All right.